It's poverty.
It's crime.
Unemployment.
Corruption.
Accountability.
The energy crisis.
Inflation. We are worried.
That South Africa has myriad problems on all fronts is a given. But the time has come for us to look for real solutions. I'm Jeremy Maggs, and this Moneyweb podcast will discuss those solutions on how South Africans can solve problems by having tough conversations and drawing on the insights of South Africa's top business leaders. Welcome to Fix SA. Today, I want to take a close focus at the telecommunications industry and how it can address structural issues, and these are well known, which are holding our country back. What am I talking about? Well, lack of access in many cases to affordable data, poor connectivity at times, particularly in rural areas, and the resulting barriers to education and entrepreneurship and financial inclusion. And joining me today is George Mendes, who is Chief Executive Officer of Cell C. You'll know that it's a key player in South Africa's telecommunications sector. So, George, thank you very much indeed. A warm welcome to Fix SA. And let's dive straight in. What do you see as the single most pressing challenge or hurdle facing the country at the moment within the sphere that you operate in?
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I think there are a number of challenges, but I think the one that's really behind us, I hope, is electricity, which was the load shedding, because that's got a significant impact on the country and our sector in particular. So I'm hoping that one is behind us, because a lot of money has been invested into energy and energy resilience just to ensure that communication stays up and running. So it doesn't generate more revenue, it just keeps the lights on, so to speak, and billions has gone into that. So I think energy resilience would have been the biggest challenge. I think now what you faced as an industry is that given market saturation and the low returns on capex deployed, I think you're starting to look at models like we have now deployed, which is active sharing of infrastructure, because it no longer makes sense to have 3 or 4 or 5 base stations next to each other with 4 transmission pipes connecting these sites with 4 generators and batteries, etc., and security guards. It just doesn't make sense anymore. So I think that the amount of sharing, active sharing, that will take place, and in other markets, forms of consolidation, but specifically in South Africa, I think that's pretty much on the cards and what we need to start doing more and more of. That lowers the cost of running networks down. It generates more revenue for those building infrastructure, and those buying technology services then get good quality. And I think you then start improving the reach of 4G and 5G type quality services to the more rural and poorest parts of the country.
George, let me pick you up on 2 of those difficulties that you had to deal with, and let's go to load shedding first of all. And I'm interested to know at its zenith how much players in your sector actually sweated and what you've done to mitigate the risk and to change the way in which you operate.
Yes, so the base stations required batteries, and the batteries needed to last X amount of hours. So if load shedding went on for beyond, say, 2 hours, then you need time to replenish those batteries when power does come back from the main grid. So you effectively needed to improve the amount of batteries and for how long those batteries could run for per base station. You're talking 14 to 15,000 base stations per big network operator, and each base station requiring a number of batteries. So you're talking easy 2-3 billion rand of battery investment per year over the last 2-3 years that has had to go in. So it's super significant just to ensure that communications was up and running.
The other issue is this infrastructural collaboration, and I think it's a metaphor for a broader fix as far as South Africa is concerned, George, across many industries. How have you managed to get that right, both philosophically and also strategically and practically?
It's a great question, and we took a very pragmatic view. So as Cell C, I think it's no secret that we've gone through a really distressed time in the past. We launched 23 years ago, and initially as consumer champion, did lots of good things, great value, and then lost its way a little bit, and the business had to be recapped, and 44 billion has been written off. It's been recapitalized twice. And so we took a very pragmatic view that said, for us to go and build a network of a great quality like a player 1 and 2 in this market, we'd have to spend at least 35 to 40 billion in infrastructure to get us on a more or less par position. And then we'd have to spend about 10 billion a year of capex into this market just to ensure that we kind of stay up to pace. And that would be comfortably 10 billion and probably somewhere between 7 and 8 on a more sustainable level annually. So we said that's not going to work for us. So we did deals with both number one and two player where we said, let's buy from a roaming point of view, access to technology services. So we keep our core, we keep our billing system, we keep our spectrum. We're a full mobile network operator. But our radio access network then becomes a virtual one. So we use MTN and Vodacom's base stations out there to actually have the coverage that we look for. And so we effectively have world-class coverage by buying technology services from MTN and Vodacom. And effectively, it means they generate significant revenue from us, which they can either bank to the bottom line or further invest in their own infrastructure. And I think this will become a model around the world, to be honest, where I think two or more market players in saturated environments, it does not make sense to have the level of infrastructure next to each other delivering the same type of service.
And it's an interesting business case study because on the one hand, you are arch competitors. On the other hand, you are partners. So what lessons have you learnt in managing that process, which maybe other industries could take on board?
Yeah, it's a complete mind shift that has to take place because you're quite right. Just naturally, it doesn't feel like on the one hand you're buying services, then you're competing. But I see it slightly differently, and I think the partners that we've got on board have seen it in pretty much the same vein. If we had to say a bakery is the industry that we're in, it doesn't make sense in my mind at least, and I think others are convinced now that we have 4 factories next to each other. Let's have one factory producing whatever it is that we need to produce. But my product that the consumer has might have sesame seeds sprinkled on my buns and somebody else's has egg wash. And we deliver in 6 packs and somebody else delivers one at a time and others can collect, et cetera, et cetera. So your route to market and the actual product offering to the consumer is where the differentiator comes in as opposed to the production of a megabyte or a minute. I really don't believe that as long as the product works and works well, when you go into saturated markets, because I can get that in the beginning when you're rolling out a network, your coverage area is very much a competitive differentiator. But 30 years later, when pretty much the whole country is covered, I don't think that's a competitive differentiator anymore. So as long as the megabytes work and the voice minutes work well, I don't believe customers get excited by opening the tap and water comes out. I think that's an expectation. How we bottle the water, what flavors go into it, how it's packaged, how it's priced, is it available in lukewarm and very cold temperatures, etc., becomes the differentiator. So I think we're in that mindset, but it has been a journey because still today I get asked very much, how can you buy services from a number 1 and 2 player, repackage, enable your own MVNOs like FNB Connect, Capitec Connect, and the list goes on, and still be competitive. There's enough margin in there from our partnership models that allow them to be successful.
And that bakery analogy, George, makes perfect sense. Let me just say off the record here that I'm a huge fan of a pastis de nata. So we can move we can move on to the next question. Let's pivot away from that, and maybe the biggest issue facing South Africa's telecom environment at the moment is affordable data, which you will agree does act as a catalyst for reducing economic inequality. Where is your headspace as far as that particular debate is concerned? And are the telcos doing enough in that respect, do you think?
I think a lot has gone into the pricing strategies of all the network operators. I can't talk for all of them, but it certainly has become a lot more competitive. Some by default and some because it's been forced in pricing transformation strategies aligned with Comcom and aligned with regulators and so on in terms of bringing prices down. I don't think there's a network operator that doesn't want to bring prices down. It's about what is the cost of actually producing minutes and megabytes. When you talk about infrastructure challenges, so we spoke about the grid and electricity earlier, when you're investing 2.5 billion rand into a network to achieve zero return just to keep what you had, that's a difficult business case to continue to do. And there's a cost in doing that. So when you look at running networks, they typically are at least, I'd say, 3, 4, 5% in terms of OPEX growth annually because of diesel prices, et cetera, et cetera. So it's difficult to continue to bring prices down when your running costs go the other way. Having said that, I think a lot has been done to bring prices down. We certainly, and if I talk for Cell C now, have done a lot and will continue to do a lot. We are happy with slightly lower margins. We are happy with partners that make a good margin and that create a sustainable business. This is, of course, our strategy since I took the reins on the 3rd of July last year. And we have continued to bring prices down. So we do believe that we offer really, really great value for money. We've got unbelievable products, but continue to bring pricing down. So I think that trend will continue. But you are seeing more and more private pricing or personalized pricing. So you'll see standard above the line prices, and then you will see very aggressive below the line prices that customers will get when they engage with either USSD or the app. So it's just a way of engaging with their own network operators.
But difficult to find that sweet spot between profitability on the one hand and affordability on the other. I would imagine it's a moving target and one that you've got to apply your mind to all the time.
Absolutely. If you take a mobile network, it's a contended network. So you have to build infrastructure to cater for kind of the busy hour. COVID, as an example, had lots of capacity in offices and office environments. And of course, when COVID hit, everybody was at home and not at the office. So suddenly the network had to be dimensioned to have greater capacity in residential areas versus commercial and office space. So one had to shift in that direction. And very much products work the same way. If you offer these huge data bundles, and that's why I say you have to offer what the network has got available to give you, then the product's got to work. So if you're offering like a terabyte of data at very low prices, because, it's a great product, then you have to make sure that the network can handle that traffic. Otherwise, you've got a problem. You're selling great value, great product, but you actually can't use it, and therefore it renders the product a little bit useless. So it's a tricky balance all the time. And the other thing is in personalizing in terms of time frame. So lots of products and big take-up by consumers to buy either voice or data or WhatsApp, etc., social media bundles for an hour, for a day, for 3 days, for 7 days. And I think that's proving to be very successful, that level of personalization.
That's the data side of the equation. The other side, of course, is the urban-rural divide when it comes to telecommunications infrastructure. And I'm interested to know what systemic barriers there are in preventing telcos, yours included, from rolling out more infrastructure in underserved areas. Because if you get that right, again, it goes a long way to the big fix.
Absolutely, and that's always been the challenge. The challenge has been on some infrastructure to connect because a lot of these don't have power, don't have transmission. So getting transmission and getting power to certain of these geographies is tricky. You have what they call daisy sites or a ring site where you have to build 10 base stations to talk to each other. And only the last one, the end base station, is effectively where the community lives. So the cost of getting the activity or the coverage to that actual geography is very, very expensive and proves difficult with the infrastructure that's available. But that's why, we welcome initiatives like Starlink and SpaceX and so on. If they are proving to be what they say they can be, and there's no reason for us to not believe that, is that maybe satellite is a lower form of connectivity cost in these particular geographies. And that's why we're quite welcoming of such an approach.
But it's not happening quick enough, though.
I think it's a journey, to be honest. That process is now moving faster. There's been conversations at a regulatory level to ensure that that's going to happen sooner rather than later. I do believe, I'm quite optimistic that it will happen in months and not years, to be honest. And I think a lot has also been done by the GSM networks and the fixed line operators to get coverage into some of these areas. We're seeing a lot of Wi-Fi mesh networks going up in very, very rural townships. So that's proving to be quite successful. Again, with fiber being costed in at prices per day. So that's becoming a little bit more successful than it's been in the past because that's exactly the areas that need a connectivity. So you're quite right that perhaps it should be done a lot faster, but it's that measure of the return on investment and how aggressive do you go.
So in that respect then, George, I'm interested to know what kind of pressure your sector is putting on the regulator in that respect. And are you satisfied with the answers that you're getting?
Well, it works both ways. I think certainly from our side, we're working well with the regulator. There's been challenges, obviously, but, they put pressure on us on meeting social obligations and meeting quality standards. And we're always trying to make sure that, policies and regulation is progressive and, pro-competition, pro-consumer that will encourage us further. There's always that healthy balance. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't work well. I think where we went a little bit off the boil was that it took 14 years for the last round of spectrum to be available. And that's the oxygen of this industry. So we can't have that again. But I think the guys in charge now, both at a ministerial level and at the regulator level, are doing good work to make sure that this is progressing a lot faster.
All right, let me pick you up on that phrase, social obligation, George, if I can. And by the way, if you're just tuning in, I'm in conversation with George Mendes here on Fix SA. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Cell C. George, social obligation. So what further role do you think the telcos can play in tackling digital literacy in South Africa so more South Africans can leverage the internet for opportunities? And if that happens, again, it's going to have a domino impact on the growth rate of this country.
I think it's absolutely that this industry is perfectly positioned and primed for that. I think we are the key to unlocking, digital economic inclusion in every sense of the word. I think education comes to mind, but every sense of the word, financial inclusion, etc. So I do believe that a handset and a smartphone, that's why we have to have the progressive regulatory changes like preventing 2G devices from coming into the country and reducing ad valorem taxes and reducing or increasing subsidies, so making the prices more affordable for smartphones, because the smartphone really unlocks quite a lot. It's effectively the internet, and you're getting bigger and bigger screens. You can have iPads, you can have big screen phones, which will allow a huge amount of education to take place, financial inclusion, etc. We've played a part as a sector. We've played a part as Cell C. You've got a whole bunch of digital websites and educational websites that we've done, and we've kept this from COVID days where they are free. So they are free to access. There's a number of these that are in place where we zero rate the activity to make sure that students do get connectivity to these education sites. There's a whole bunch of work that gets done in connecting schools and making sure that there's schools that are connected, ITC hubs that are fully connected, laptops, etc., etc. So a lot of work's being done in that sector.
But is enough work being done? Would it not be better, George, to have a more unified approach from the big telco players instead of you all doing your own thing?
It is a unified approach. Effectively, we do get this from the regulator. We're trying to improve the level of collaboration between each other, but it is a unified approach. So we're not all going to the same geographies and same schools, etc., so that it is divided up in the country, and it's a lot more effective that way.
Let's talk a little bit about the bigger contribution that telcos should make. And there is an argument that maybe you should be contributing more to the national development goals of the country. If you agree with that assertion, how do you think it could be implemented a little more effectively?
The sector is doing a significant amount of work, and effectively, when we look at our contribution, if you look at just the revenue generated by the last round of spectrum, that was in excess of 14 billion. And that goes straight into the fiscus. What happens thereafter, I think, is not something in our control. But we really do believe that from an economic point of view, the digital capability and what we're putting on the table in world-class services certainly will unlock a lot that can happen. If you look at SMEs and SOHOs in rural areas, how they're starting to perform economic activity by simply having access to a mobile device, etc., it's really, really starting to unlock that. So I think there's a strong role already being played. Could we do more? I think that's always the case. If one would love to do more, I think there's always the balance that needs to take place.
Let me pull the conversation back a little bit. We're now operating in an environment of a coalition government or a government of national unity. I've said to so many guests before that if I had a rand for every time someone used the phrase green shoots, I would be a very wealthy individual. But having said that, George, things are changing in this country. Business confidence, business sentiment is improving. As a leading chief executive of a big player in South Africa's economy right now, where is your confidence level and where are you still concerned about the risks?
Well, in general, I'm a lot more optimistic than I was a while ago. I think what you're starting to have is ministers competing, and healthy competition is always good. Nobody wants to be outdone. So I think a lot of work is going into the different ministries to improve service delivery, etc. I really believe that that's a good thing. There's still a lot that has to be done because there's a history that we need to address, right? And I think we need to improve job creation. I mean, that's clear, because even when the economy grows, if it's jobless growth, where you've got GDP growth but at a jobless level, then you're going to continue with a huge amount of social grants and so on. And I think those are not sustainable models. One needs to have real job creation taking place. One has to put focus on the jobs of the future, and that's always a challenge, because we know that technology is going to start doing more and more of the linear type of work, and we need to develop skills to get more complex skills for the future. And that has to be built into curriculums and into universities and so on. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. But we live in an amazing place. I mean, South Africa is incredibly resilient. And as individuals, I think we're sometimes a bit too critical of ourselves because we do a lot of good. It is true that we should do more in many places. The level of poverty and unemployment is unacceptable. We should not be having this in today's day and age still. So I think a lot of work still has to go in. But the level of collaboration between public and private sector, and the level of competitiveness now taking place with let's call it a mixed government, so one of national unity from different areas, I think is proving to be more successful than less successful. And I think it will accelerate, to be honest, because we're already seeing significant positive signs taking place everywhere.
How is your company dealing with the onslaught of artificial intelligence? And again, give me the answer based on how it can help fix things in this country.
It's a very, very good question, because you have to lean into technology of this nature. You can't avoid it. This is not an ostrich putting its head in the sand. It's happening globally, and we have to embrace it. So what we have to do is make sure that one is responsible and prepared for it. So cybersecurity is a big, big thing and big focus for us, because as technology evolves, you need to harden and protect the cybersecurity environment. So effectively, the digital electric fence, if you like, around your organization's technology infrastructure. But at the same time, you're going to have machine learning, you're going to have artificial intelligence, and one has to have algorithms rather than software and technology to ensure that these things are done in an ethical way, in a way that makes everything work really, really well and professional, and that things are not skewed or that you don't have this fake news or fake transactions taking place. And that's always a difficult one. So you need to set yourself up with control centers that test these kind of things and write algorithms to test these kind of things all the time to see whether you're picking up any of this kind of nonsense that takes place globally when it comes to what machines can do. So it's a tricky one. But we're starting to see a lot more investment going into these areas to, one, ensure that you protect your organization, protect consumers. There's a lot more that they can be exposed to these days with artificial intelligence, and then trying to ensure that it's used in a responsible way, which is always the tricky part, right? And using technology in the hands of those that want to do good as opposed to the other way around.
Let me ask you one final question. If you got a call today from the presidency and they were giving you the keys to the Ministry of Telecommunications for just one day, and you were the minister, if you could implement one nationwide connectivity reform, what would it be and why?
That's a really great question. I think I'd probably go with the sharing answer that we had earlier. I think there's a lot more to be achieved as a collective industry by collaborating than competing. And I mean that in every possible way. I think there's a huge amount that can be done. Of course, the brands need to compete. That's healthy. And in having a pro-competition environment is really, really healthy. And a pro-consumer environment is really healthy. But I would accelerate the level of sharing that takes place, because I think that becomes quite wasteful and doesn't really add a level of competition. And that's in every aspect. So I'm not just talking about physical infrastructure, but if you look at spectrum as an example, having spectrum and having deep pockets to be able to buy spectrum and then having that as a competitive edge over another network operator probably is not the best strategy. But using spectrum efficiently, because it's a scarce resource in the country, across all network operators, and the consumers benefit from that. Obviously, there's work to be done in how that's done, so the execution thereof and the management thereof, etc. But, spectrum pooling and sharing arrangements and so on should become the norm, and I think that will go into policies into the future. But I think that's the direction of travel, is that you can still compete, but be efficient in what you share and don't share to make the sector a lot more viable.
George Mendes, it's been a pleasure talking to you, the Chief Executive Officer of Cell-C, my guest on this edition of Fix SA, right here on Moneyweb. Thanks for listening to this Fix SA podcast. For more episodes posted every second Friday, go to moneyweb.co.za, the Moneyweb app, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or follow Moneyweb News on social media for more updates. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.